Alright guys, in this video I want to talk about changing out the oil pan gasket on this E39. So this will be relevant for a 525, 528, or a 530 from 1996 all the way through 2003. I just finished up the oil pan gasket a few weeks ago. I wanted to come out with this video on some tips to hopefully minimize the amount of time it takes for you to do this job. So why on earth would you do this job in the first place? Because it takes forever and you have to buy a bunch of stuff. Well, if you go to the dealership and you ask for a quote like I did, I called up and I said, hey, how much to do this job with all the parts included? And they quoted me $1,400. And they said, listen to this, they said it was a seven to 7.5 hour long job, which I thought was absolutely crazy, but apparently, they're trained to do this thing, so maybe that makes sense. For me, it did not take me 7 hours. It took me well over 7 hours, but nonetheless, it's a $1,400 job. If you're willing to spend that, go do it. This is the Atlanta area. If you want to spend the $1,400, go for it. For me, I did not. I wanted to do it myself, so I saved about $1,150 doing it myself after all of the parts and tools were subtracted off, and then I feel like I gained a lot of mechanical experience doing this job, and I feel more confident moving forward doing things. So those are the two reasons why you'd want to do this job yourself. Saving money, take your lady out on the town, or like most of us do, we just throw it back into the car. I'll leave that up to you, and then you gain that mechanical experience. Now, once you figure out why you want to do it, what are some things you should do before you start the job? Well, I would highly recommend getting all of the parts and all of the tools that you need to do the job before beginning. That way you're not going to run into any sort of snafus along the way where you reach a point and you think, oh geez, I never got that tool that I needed, or I never got that part that I needed at this point because I didn't think I actually needed it. You probably need it. If you're reading through and you saw somebody use something, you probably need it. And it's going to help everything go smoother. So have all the tools and all the parts. Now I'm going to go ahead and walk through the tools that I use. I'm going to run through really quick. Most people probably already have them. There's a couple things I'll point out that you probably don't have, and I'll bring attention to them. So basic metric socket sets. That's all the way up to 18 millimeter, and then you're also going to need a 23 millimeter to take the oil filter out. A Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver. You're going to need a breaker bar, and then maybe a pipe for some extra leverage. You're going to need like a little rubber mallet or a hammer to break the subframe loose if it's stuck. Something to hold up the brakes, maybe a zip tie, or I use some chain. And then you're also going to want to use some gloves. I've got some disposable gloves here. That way you can just pull the glove off and eat a snack while you're doing the job. Keeps the motivation high while you're doing it. Very important. I'd also recommend some glasses. It gets very gross underneath the car, even when you clean it before sliding underneath. There's 20 years of grime underneath the thing. Of course there's going to be stuff falling into your eyeballs. I would also recommend having an external 8 millimeter Allen socket, and that's going to be to release the tension on the belts when you go to take those off. And the two parts or tools that you probably don't have are going to be the fan clutch tool, $17 off of Amazon. I'll put the link in the description if you want to get that. No, I'm not affiliated with it. And then also you're going to want an engine hoist. I've already put that away, so I'm not going to pull it out, but I got that from Harbor Freight, and of course, they had a coupon code, so I got like 15 bucks off, so that was awesome. You're also going to need a jack, maybe two. Two is always better than one when you go to raise the suspension back up. And then 4 jack stands, one for each corner. Now, if you have a lift, that's awesome. I don't have a lift, so I needed my 4 jack stands. But that is really all you need for tools. Pretty straightforward on the tool front. Now on the parts, I'm going to call out everything that you have to have, and then I'll call out the optional stuff that you can do while you're in there. The old while you're in there type deal, So the oil, obviously you want to put new oil in there. That's a easy peasy. It was about 25 bucks. Nothing crazy there, maybe $30. It's 6.5 quarts of oil. You're gonna want a brand new filter, and then you'll want the gasket that goes inside that filter, the little rubber O-ring. You're gonna need the new oil pan gasket, and you can buy a BMW one or you can buy an aftermarket one, also your choice there. And then you're gonna need a new oil pan O-ring, or it's a dipstick oil pan O-ring. That's like $3, nothing crazy there. Now, when it comes to, those are the main things that you need: oil filter, new oil pan gasket, and the dipstick O-ring. That's really it. When it comes to optional things, the whole while you're in there, depending on how many miles you have and how much maintenance has been done to your vehicle, you can do the engine mounts. I did those, which I haven't noticed a huge difference. I don't know if they were replaced before. The ones that I had were pretty cracked up and gooey, but engine mounts, it's like $40 or so. You can do the tranny mounts. I bought those as well. You can do the accessory belt and the drive belt. That's probably about $10 and $20 per belt. You can do the rotors, you can do the brake pads, you can do the wear sensors, and I want to say there was maybe a couple other things. Oh, you can do the tensioner, you can do the pulleys while you have the fan out. All of these things can be done while you're in there, but they're optional. So just think about it. If you need them done, now is a good opportunity to get them done if you're wanting to go that far. Now again, with all of these parts and the tools that I bought, it was roughly $241. You add tax, we'll call it anywhere from maybe $275 down to $240. It's somewhere in the range of what I spent for all the parts and the tools. And that is what I found was essential prior to starting the job, having all of those things in hand, out on the table, ready to go. Now, once you have all of your stuff, now is when you can lift up the car. Whether you're using a lift inside your garage or you're using jack stands, you're gonna move your car over, lift it up, and then the first thing that I would do, the first tip that I have, is to start draining the oil. There's 6.5 quarts in there, and it takes a long time for it all to go out. So if you can drain the oil and then come back the next day, perfect. If you can't, that's fine, but start with draining the oil so there's a lot out by the time that you get to actually removing the oil pan. After that, you're gonna remove the calipers off, and then you're going to hang them. You're going to detach the shroud. You can take the fan out at that point. And then you can remove the oil level sensor. Once you do that, you can remove those two bottom engine mount bolts, and then you can go to the top side, remove those two. At this point, you can jack the engine up. Remember, we've got the fan out, and so the engine can go high enough without damaging the fan. At this point, we're going to want to put the engine brace bar over top of the engine. Now, don't try and lift the engine with the bar. Don't sit there trying to tighten it up and raise it even higher. Jack it up with the jack, put the engine hoist bar on there, and then just snug it. Don't try and lift it, and then relieve the pressure on the jack, and the engine will sit where you have it. At this point, you can probably take out the engine mounts if you wanted to. Just wait till later, honestly, when the subframe drops. It's so much easier. But once you get to this point, you're doing pretty good. You can now remove all of the subframe bolts. Now, this is where there were complications, right? There's 6 bolts. 6. And if you watch the video that I posted, I'll show you where they all are. But 2 of them, and symmetrical, 3 on one side, 3 on the other. 2 of them are covered up by some plastic, the back 2. And so you have to remove that plastic. It takes about 10 minutes. It's no big deal. Just remember where all the plastic clips go and all those little tiny 8mm bolts go. And then you should be good to remove those. So once you have those 6 bolts loosened and removed, and do note that some of them are probably going to be really rusty and grimy, so that's when you're going to need that extra pipe with the breaker bar in there to get that leverage and get it off. This is when you want to remove the power steering rack or detach it from the subframe. This is going to give you the maximum droppage of the subframe onto the ground. The more room that you have to slide that oil pan out, the better. Trust me, trust me, trust me. So remove the 6 bolts, and while you still have the subframe held up by the jack, put the jack underneath that little rubber block or whatever, put it underneath the subframe, remove the steering rack. It's a 16mm bolt with a 16mm nut. Just stick your open end on top and loosen it up, take them out. You can take out the steering coupler bolts. I didn't notice that it moved at all. You can leave it in there if you want. I don't think it really moves. If you want to play it safe, just take it on out. Now at this point, as you lower the jack, with the 6 subframe bolts out and the 2 steering rack bolts out, the whole subframe should drop. So just be careful, your rotors may hit the ground. You can put a towel down if you're worried about that, but the whole thing is going to come down. At this point, you are good to remove the oil pan. Now there's going to be 20 some odd bolts that you have to remove. Just be careful. If you're going to reuse them, you can, but note that they have experienced some tension on them and they've expanded or lengthened a little bit. They are aluminum. They're only supposed to be used once, then you put in new bolts. But if you reuse them, put them in a template or something so you know where they all go. There's going to be, I think it's like 24 of the little bolts, and then you're going to have 3 Torx that go in the back side where the bell housing is. And remember to take those out as well. Once you have the oil pan out, slide it out the back way, but be careful of the oil pickup tube that's sitting there. You don't want to damage it, but just slide it out. Don't try and rip it. You may have to take the sway bar off. It's just a few bolts for that as well. It's no big deal. But slide it out the back side, and then what you're going to want to do is clean it. Take a razor blade and go over, not super hard. You don't want to gouge the oil pan and put any scarring on it, but clean any of the gunk off that's on it, any residue that's on there. Do the same thing with the block. Go by and clean it a little bit, and then spray down the whole oil pan, clean out any goo that's inside there. And then you should be good to go. You can let it sit overnight if you want to kind of dry out any of the moisture that's in it. That's probably a good idea. But if you don't have the time, now is when you're going to put the oil pan gasket onto the oil pan. Then you're going to take some gasket sealer if you've got it laying around, or you can go and buy it. It's like $7 or so. Put it on each of the corners. This is going to keep the gasket from sliding whenever you go to lift it back up. It's a very tight space if you're underneath your car, so you want it to stick there, and then you're going to slide it up, push it into place, right? Try not to damage or bend anything. Slide it up, and with the subframe all the way down, it should be fairly easy, but put it in there. And then 2 bolts in the front of the oil pan, put those in first. They should be pretty simple to get in there. Once you have 2 bolts holding the front in, at this point, to relieve you from having to hold it up, put 2 of those Torx bolts back into the backside by the bell housing. That way it's holding the back part of the pan. Now it can be easy if you need to wiggle anything around to get the gasket to line up and stick the rest of the 20 some odd bolts in. That makes it so much easier when you're not having to hold the thing up. Once you have all the bolts finger tightened in, go buy 5 foot-pounds worth of torque and then do 7.5 foot-pounds worth of torque. So do it in that manner and kind of go in some sort of pattern so you're not putting all the pressure on one side and then trying to tighten it on the other side. That's what I would recommend. Now you are good to go with putting everything back together. You're on the home stretch. The reassembly, this is a very good feeling. And if you've timed it right, maybe dinner just started to get on, and so you're trying to work to get to your dinner. Now, you're going to want to start with lifting the subframe. Don't worry about the steering rack right now. To get the bolts aligned, or the holes for the steering rack and the subframe aligned, you have to jack the whole thing back up. So lift up the subframe all the way up to where it's in position. Put in your new engine mounts if you're going to replace those, and once it starts to get close, note that there is going to be a pin on the driver's side that's going to align the subframe, so don't worry about it getting all off kilter. You're going to stick in your steering rack bolts. Now, I suggested having 2 jacks because it makes it easier and kind of relieves some of the tension as you're trying to wiggle the subframe into place. If you have another jack, or you have one jack to hold the subframe and the steering rack that are sitting on top of each other, and then have another jack. It could be out of another car, it could be out of the Beamer that you're working on, and jack up the suspension components. So sit there underneath the control arm or underneath the rotor and jack it up and put the 3 bolts for the shock tower back in place. Do that on both sides. That's going to help you when you're lining up the subframe as you jack it up. So you've got your suspension components put back up. They don't have to be totally tightened down. You're lifting the subframe. You stuck the power steering rack back together. And at this point, you can start to put your bolts in for the subframe. That made everything so much easier. The whole idea of dropping the subframe was really scary to me beforehand. But now that I've done it, it's just the 6 bolts and the power steering rack, and it puts itself all back together. There's nothing that's really going to keep you from doing anything, doing any damage to your vehicle unless you don't torque everything to spec, or you damage some component and don't fix it along the way. But you should be totally fine. Everything kind of lines itself up. Now, going from there, you're really just slapping everything back together. It's not very difficult. You're going to stick the fan shroud back in place. You're going to tighten the fan back in place, wiggle your new belts, or if you're reusing the old ones, put those back into place. Look at a diagram for your specific engine. Make sure your belts are routed the right way. It's always good to have 2 people, so one person can loosen the tensioner while the other person slides the belts into place. I had a friend do it, made everything so much better to do it that way. From that point, you really are good to go. You're going to tighten up the shock towers on both sides, torque them to spec. You're going to put your brake calipers back on, and then you're going to put your wheels back on, put the air box back in, and you're pretty much good to go. Just go slow, make sure you think through everything, follow the video that I put out, follow the forum little how-to diagram that is in the link of the description of my other video. Follow all that stuff and you should have no problem. Am I gonna tell you it's gonna take 7 hours? No, it's not gonna take you 7 hours. There's a reason that BMW technicians get paid $200 an hour when doing jobs. It's probably gonna take you, goodness, somebody said that it took them 12 hours on the forum, and I thought that was even absurd. It's probably going to take you about 20 hours. So if you start at, say, 11 p.m. the day before, you might get done in time for dinner. But nonetheless, if you want to break it into a 2-day job, go for it. If you want to do over the course of a week, do one little step at a time, that would be good as well. But just go slow. You don't want to break anything along the way. And again, if you follow the video that I put out and then you follow the tutorial on the forums, I think that you will be totally fine doing this job. Totally fine. So I wish you guys the best of luck. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. I will definitely answer them. I probably didn't do the best of jobs explaining all of this, so please leave your questions, any comments that you have in regards to it. Let me know, and hopefully you guys can tackle this job and do it a lot faster than I did. So hope you guys have a great day and best of luck to you.